Welcome to the Digital Insight Podcast, where we bring you part 2 of my discussion with Dr Elouise Epstein, partner at Kearney, and Lance Younger, CEO and founder of ProcureTech. So we know that the digital procurement landscape and the technology and the advancements, whether it's AI, whether it's automation, we know that there's significant value and significant benefit in embracing it and adopting it. And we've seen countless examples of where it works, and we've seen examples where it hasn't worked. But largely, we know that these things make a difference, and it's going to define the future. However, you sort of said it at the top, but many CPOs have said to me, and have kind of almost confessed that they have felt that procurement hasn't done enough in that regard, in the sense that it should have been more advanced than what it is today, and that it shouldn't have taken what's happened in the last year to propel and accelerate some of these conversations. Is that something you can agree with? Do you think that procurement has almost been holding itself back in terms of its potential when it comes to embracing and really kind of driving innovation through these technologies? And why do you think it's kind of held itself back, if it has, so to speak?
Well, for the most part, it has, and it's self-inflicted. Look at what a quote unquote best in practice is. It's buy a big source to pay implementation. So 3, 4, 5 years and 20, 30, $40 million later, you're supposed to have a fully functioning best in class procurement operation. Who's achieved that? Very, very few people. And in fact, most of my work is coming in on the heels of failed big source to pay implementations. And oftentimes I get brought in the middle of them. And so that to me signals that the quote unquote best in class is not really that. It's just a way of perpetuating the status quo. And when we really start to look at what has to change, first off, the clients themselves, starting at the top, the CPOs need to demand more accountability. Benefits need to come in weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, a month, or a couple of months. You can't be waiting years for the benefits. And I spend a lot of time looking at these failed implementations, and I go right to the benefits case. The benefits are always wildly out proportion of what they could ever deliver. It's just imaginary numbers. And there's a lot of complicity with the vendors, the analysts, and everybody else. There's a lot of blame to go around, but at the end of the day, the clients themselves have to not accept that, and not accept whether it's the external influences or their internal ones. The IT says, oh, well, we're an SAP shop. Well, that's great, but that's not you're basically setting yourself up for failure if you just accept that. That's not a strategy, that's an abdication. So we have to, and this is my goal, is to get people to be more critical of this and expect more from these vendors and the consultants or the SIs and all the people that have made billions of, if not trillions of dollars over the last 2 decades. And we have to do better.
Yeah, but and there's different ways of looking at it, because there's not only the initial purchase or selection of a solution, but also the way you roll it out, and when you call it in terms of the ROI, whether it's the next category or the next region or the next country, and achieving those KPIs, as Elouise calls out, are critical. The other thing I've seen, I used to work at Ariba for a few years, is that organizations do get a bit fatigued by, they've started the journey, and these are big organizations, so there's a lot to do, and they get fatigued after they've hit 18, 24 months, and then the CPO changes, and I think that causes part of the problem. If you can't execute something in a 3-month window or a 6-month window or 12-month window and show the ROI, then you get fatigue, and it becomes the implementation becomes business as usual, which is wrong. It's business as usual is the end point, not the process of implementing. So there's a few things
Yeah,
that need to change. I think are changing.
yeah, and I think the big thing what you said, Lance, and I harp on this a lot, is that organizational turnover leaves the proverbial fox in the hen house, because the only people that are the continuity are your external systems integrators and the tech
Mm,
vendors. So that like it
mm,
has to be within a year, because otherwise the middle management turns over, the leadership turns over. That just ensures that those projects
Hmm.
fail to deliver.
And focusing on those, so like you
mm,
said, those tech vendors or those system integrators, obviously, procurement is as good as it is for most businesses. They don't create their own systems. They don't create their own solutions. They don't have the answers. And they obviously, yeah, that's where they outsource and look for these tech vendors. But as technology continues to advance, as marketplaces grow, so too does the number and the sort of the sheer scope of how many solutions are out there, how many vendors are promising the world and promising the solution that's right for your business to fix your particular problem or challenge, or realign your procurement function. Um, how I'm trying to think sort of the right way to word it. How difficult of it is it in terms of, yes, it's great that there's so many solutions out there. Yes, it's great that there's so many successful vendors that you can work with. But how difficult is it to kind of almost cut through all the noise and identify and liaise with and establish a real working relationship with a tech vendor that has the right solution? Because obviously it's a risky venture to invest money to sort of say this is the solution for us and it fails. Try and describe or try and talk to me a little bit about just how that relationship has changed entirely and how that entire process of going out to market and having these conversations is radically changed, and is continuing to change as we speak now.
mm. I think on the biggest challenge, I think, is on the buy side, not the supply side, with the level of, or the opportunity for organizations to be able to choreograph how they engage with their technology providers, because all too often there isn't an overall strategy, plan, roadmap, and then there isn't an appreciation of how you can bring on different solutions at different stages. So you'll find that often it's either, yes, we're going to go for one size fits all, a big ERP player, or we're going to go for best of breed. And in both instances, they get exposed to the dangers. So we've talked a little bit already about the big ERP players and the problem of time. But when you engage with a large number of small players, you need to be set up in the right way. And a few organizations are doing this. They have an infrastructure that can accept and integrate. They have a kind of an agile way of working. They have an appreciation of how they run pilots, and how they take pilots through to scale, to roll out. And I think that's incumbent upon the procurement function to have that level of maturity or sophistication to be able to engage with the software players. Well, find them, engage them, and then scale them. Um, I know from the view I've got that if you've got a problem, there is already a solution out there in the market. It's just often that that people aren't finding it, because they're either limited to previous experience, or they're limited to only looking within a certain area. And then people need to look beyond to find those solutions, and then work out a process to be able to onboard them and
Yeah.
scale them.
And I would also add that this is where the people component comes in, because we should be, if you're working in a procurement organization, whether you're the CPO or the the person that runs technology, you should be out in the market talking to these folks and having a comfort level. Because I would ask each and every one, we all have iPhones, and I would ask how many, or Android devices, how many apps do we have on there? 20, 40, 100? Like, we have no, like, the complexity of apps is not the problem. It's the desire to go and look at these and engage with them. And in my my discussions with CPOs, I have a logo chart of all these, like everybody does, a logo chart of all these startups. And what I've observed over the last few years is now when I show that to CPOs, they start going around. They go, "Oh yeah, we're working with them. We're working with them. I know who they are. We've been talking to them. These people send me emails all day. Oh, who are they?" And the familiarity with all the logos, I think it's a cultural change that's happening, that we're not afraid of the complexity
And
anymore.
I speak to a lot of people in obviously different industry sectors. So, for example, one of the big sort of talking points I kind of cover a lot is kind of in the fintech and banking space. And one of the things we mentioned, similar to what you just said then, is about, once upon a time, it was you sort of only really heard from and listened to the larger incumbents because they dominated the industry, they had the highest market share, and that never really showed any signs of changing. And then as technology advanced and as startups came along, fintechs and disruptors, suddenly that's kind of created a dynamic shift where rather than people just looking directly at these big players, they now seek out the so-called smaller ones, these disruptors, because that's where they're seeing true innovation. That's where they're seeing the biggest changes, and it's forcing those larger incumbents to suddenly look over their shoulders and think, well, what do we need to change? So is it fair to say that's happening then in the tech space from a procurement perspective? Lance said there, you talk a lot about, and we reference a lot of the larger known names like an ERP solution. You hear the big names, but it's actually the startups now that are really catching the eyes of the CPOs and the business leaders. And what is that doing for those bigger ERP players? Are they suddenly, I don't want to say feeling threatened, but are they themselves, I guess, looking and almost rethinking about their own solutions and approach and relationships with procurement professionals because they're seeing this dynamic shift?
Well, yeah, I think they're all threatened. How they react is going to be different based on where they're at. But you already see this. Ariba just announced their app store, and so we're going to see that take shape. Coupa's already had an app store, so and then I'm not sure what the others are doing exactly, or I don't want to comment publicly, but you can start to see the signals that they're shifting because they've lost, for better or worse, whether it's right or wrong, they've lost the credibility around innovation and ability to deliver. And it is, as you said, has shifted to these startups. And because the startups come in and they can promise benefits in 3 to 6 weeks, and that sounds pretty good when I need like in the banking industry, they need cost savings now. Like, if you can give me cost savings now, especially if I don't have to pay for the tool, so if it's a supplier funded model, we're seeing different innovative pricing models, and all these, and time to benefits is shrinking. So everything the big players are selling is falling flat. Not to mention a 2-decade history of failing to deliver. So I think absolutely. So if you're a big player, and they're my favorite target, they have to shift, and you are starting to see them shift, and not all of them are going to make it. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah. And they're deploying different strategies, as Elouise says. I think if you look at Ariba, I think they've decided they can only evolve so far, and so yes, they need to play more on their ecosystem, their alliances. Yes, they've got the App Store. Yes, they've got SAP IO Ventures. So they are being smart about how they kind of respond to the market. Different to Coupa, yes, they've also acquired a large number of businesses as they've grown as well. and I think you'll see others develop sort of similar models. The whole market's forecast to grow anywhere between 8 to 10% year on year. So I'd imagine what will happen is, it hasn't happened so much, but the share of the market will stay the absolute amount of the market will stay the same for some of these bigger players, but the smaller players and mid-size that are successful will get bigger growth. I think we'll see some of that market share taken from outside. Solutions coming from legal in covering the contract management space will start to cover space, as we've seen with risk as well. So slightly different models, but yeah, all addressing it in the same way.
And you can't buy your way out of this. If you're one of the big providers, you can't buy your way out of this, because the pressures are coming. First off, the valuations of these individual startups is crazy. And it's probably overblown. So I'm sure a course correction is coming, but still, you can't buy your way out of this. And to build on Lance's point, when you talk about risk and some of these elements, just having a source to pay suite that you're selling for tens of millions of dollars, that era is done, because you can't afford to do that, because what's in that suite? If risk is in that suite, well, it's not going to be you need a risk across the supply chain, not just risk in procurement. So why am I buying a risk module for procurement? I need a risk module and actually what I really need is a risk platform at the supply chain level. And so you kind of go down the entire procurement value chain, and you realize that just what a single source to pay provider can give me, that even if that was perfect, that's inadequate for this new world that we live in. So I think the pressure's coming multiple ways. And what I will give Coupa credit for is one of their big acquisitions last year was Lamosoft. And to my reading of this, I don't have inside information, but my reading of this is that they recognize this trend, and they're looking now at the broader supply chain. And so their investments are at the supply chain level, not simply at, oh, here's another module.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the market is procurement market does lag some of the other markets, whether it's fintech or marketing and other areas. And what they've seen is a fragmentation of the market, and lots of niche solutions go in and fill in individual capabilities, and then an evolution from there where they've started to combine. And a lot of the VCs talk about this compound effect, which is you're not going in to solve a point solution, because the point solutions have pretty much been done. And I don't think they've all been done, but they've pretty much been done. And so what we'll see next is either acquisitions from top down, or a compounding effect, which will be a little bit, as Elouise describes there, whether it's across risk or across a particular category, and you'll see a combination, or people extending their footprint to fill those problems. And that comes back to the whole ecosystem integration play as well.
And building off that, so what you're going to get is some of these compound solutions, they're going to be the tail that wags the dog, because they're solving very critical components, and it makes not necessarily that you get rid of the source to pay or the ERP, but all of a sudden the value's in the tail, and that tail, is again wagging the dog.
So zooming out a little bit then, and Elouise has mentioned a couple of times already, and it goes without saying, but sometimes it can be easy to forget, is obviously it's great to talk about technology. It's great to talk about all this change, all these operating models. It's great to talk about what it's going to do for the business, but ultimately it will always boil down to the people who are operating the strategy, the procurement professionals or the supply chain professionals who, like you said, have to go out and have these conversations, have these relationships, and work with suppliers and that sort of thing. As a CPO or as a procurement professional, what are some of the kind of biggest ways that they've had to almost rethink how they approach what procurement is, and almost rethink how they understand what procurement is because of this kind of digital evolution? And how much do they sort of say it gets to a point today where you're constantly challenging your own thinking? do they have to recognize that they can't suddenly get to a certain point and go, okay, I know so much about AI and new tech vendors and new ways of working, I can put my feet up now. No, tomorrow's going to be a new challenge, and the day after that's going to be a new challenge. So talk to me a little bit about just how the actual leaders and the leadership teams and the procurement professionals have had to reevaluate and rethink how they approach their role.
Yeah, so and to a degree, procurement has almost come full circle. Yeah, if you go back to my reference to the 90s, procurement was very, very decentralized. It was very pushed out. Everybody was buying everywhere and anywhere they wanted to, and in that view, it was viewed as being out of control. Whereas now we're kind of at an age where basically you want to empower people to buy where they buy. You want to basically decentralize things. You've got the next generation of individuals coming through that are used to point of purchase and on demand. And in turn, leadership is shifting their mindset. They're shifting their behaviors to basically be more inclusive, more diverse, but using digitalization to enable decentralization of procurement. You don't necessarily need to now rule with an iron policy to make sure you get compliance. You don't necessarily need to centralize everything, or, as Elouise talked about before, centralize everything and have it all tied up tightly with a category management strategy, because you've got that transparency, you've got that equity, you've got that equilibrium, you've got the democracy. Now, that's a bit of it's a bit of a bold vision, but at the same time, I think that those are the things that we can now envisage happening, and I think we have to, because we've got a set of consumers, we've got a set of suppliers, we've got a team. They're expecting that as well.
Well, let me build on that vision. Think about each of these new technologies that come out. That's going to change business models. So think about 3D printing. That's a great technology. But if you're a medical device provider and you start printing 3D components or surgical instruments, well, what's that? What's the implication there? All of a sudden, you're now kind of contract with third-party providers, third-party printers, because you're not necessarily going to buy the printers themselves. You might, but increasingly, you will probably partner with a new type of supplier, which means you're going to need new types of agreements to protect your IP, because all of a sudden, when you're just launching your IP across, like you hit print and your IP goes across the ether, then it becomes it becomes a much different way of operating. It's a new business model, and procurement's at the center of it. And that's what I think is really interesting about where we're going in the future, because all of a sudden, again, like I said earlier, we are not only are we at the table, we're a critical part of that table.
So one kind of sort of final question then for you. Obviously, so much can change on a dime. That something could happen tomorrow, or even in the next few hours, that could change it, radically create like a huge sort of shift. But it's, as you've said, and as it's very clear, and many people have echoed this sentiment, it's a fantastic time to be in procurement. This moment in time in procurement's history, if you could kind of zoom out and pinpoint it, it's probably one of the greatest times to be involved in it, because there's so much potential, there's so much change, opportunity happening. And based on what we've talked about what we've thought kind of held us back in terms of how far we've come in terms of our maturity, I'm not going to say what's one thing right now that people should be doing that's going to really unlock and capitalize and seize and leverage that opportunity. But what do you think will play a key role, perhaps over the next 12 months, to keep it kind of not too far in the future? What's kind of, do you think will be some of those key accelerators in terms of pushing the digital conversation further, in terms of driving more innovation, in terms of really taking digital procurement to its next level, and not just, as you've said before, just more of the same, but it really will capitalize on this sort of opportunity that stands in front of procurement right now?
Yeah, I'd say two things. Looking at that 12-month window, I'd pick one pain point or one challenge, and then go and find one or two. It might be an existing solution, but new solutions that are going to basically address that and help you, basically, change something. And for me, that sustainability or something in that sustainable area, whether it's something to do with tracking products, or something to do with your carbon footprint, whether it's something to do with inclusivity, pick one of those areas, and then basically spend the next 12 months finding a solution, because there will be a technical solution somewhere that's going to basically give you transparency, it's going to give you speed, it's going to give you accountability that you didn't have before. That's what I'd kind of be looking to do as a starting point.
Yeah, and I'd build on that by saying that is setting a bold vision and the concept or the associated strategy with that, and because now is the time to do that. It's now is the time to have the board's ear, to have the ELT's ear, because everybody cares about, as Lance was saying, sustainability, even supplier diversity, risk, all top of the agenda, and in addition to cost savings and innovation. Now is the time to take something bold and really run with it. And if I think there's been 3 times in the history of procurement, or at least modern procurement, and one was sort of the strategic sourcing, where we figured out that we're back in the 90s, that everybody's like, we could save millions of dollars on office supplies, which seems so anachronistic now. And in the early 2000s, when we had some startups and e-sourcing became a thing, and ERPs, and so on and so forth, like it became like, oh, this we can reimagine this. And I think this is the time that we are actually at that inflection point where we can do the bold thing that we have longed to do, and we have the technology to support that. It's not fully baked, but we can chart that vision, and those that choose that path, I think we'll see a lot of benefits from that.
Yeah, and I think with that as well, everyone, again, ecosystem platforms, that gets overused. But in the past, I would say, if you're trying to set up alliances and the like, it would, you could spend a lot of time doing it. Whereas now, I think what COVID's done for us, it's proven that people can establish collaborations based upon a clear purpose. So to Elouise's point, think big and bold. Basically set something that's a little bit scary as well as exciting, but then realize that you're not going to do it by yourself. Yes, you're going to rely upon the business, but I think you won't be able to do it without support from other people in the ecosystem. And the broader that ecosystem is, the better. So yes, we talked about technology providers, but going further than that, whether it's working with some of the universities, STEM based, that are creating the scientists, the data scientists, or whether it's more tightly aligned to the VC side of the business, whether it's internally from corporate venturing or otherwise, so building that partner network, ecosystem network, that basically gives you the ability to stand on the shoulders of those giants and achieve the big hairy goal.